Coming up on this week's show, has the Switch 2 got emulation problems?
A long-running tech magazine comes to an end.
And we chat with legendary programmer Alan Anderson.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each and every Friday with our sponsor, our great friends at Bitmap Books. Now today, lots of Super Nintendo chat. Have you seen their incredible book, Super Nintendo / Super Famicom, a visual compendium? Now in stock now, this is a real love letter to the SNES, covering some of the biggest titles on there. Actually, all the titles you remember and some forgotten classics as well, weighing in at more than 500 pages and bringing those games to life alongside gorgeous screenshots, text, anecdotes and lots more as well. If you love Super Nintendo gaming, a must buy. You can check it out in the rest of their retro gaming collection at bitmapbooks.com. And with our friends at PCBWay. Now, maybe you're working on a retro project over the summer. Have you seen their website? They offer fully featured custom PCB prototyping. And if you're in the market for services like 3D printing and injection molding, they've got you covered. And maybe you need some ideas. They've got an incredible shared project section on their website. And also, get an instant quote for yours right now. Head to their website at PCBWay.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 486, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And a very warm welcome to the show, the podcast that every single Friday brings you up to speed on all the big happenings in the wonderful world of retro gaming and technology and brings on more veterans of the industry for a bit of a chat about their career, the games they worked on, their history as well, on an interview in the second half of the show. And we've got an incredible guest on the way this week, and being that this is our 486 episode, I hope you're dialing in from Windows 3.1 on a 486 PC, Ravi, to keep it on theme.
I had to say to Dan, it's episode 486. Let's talk about 486 machines, because we missed episode 360. We didn't do any Xbox stuff. So we're really bad with these episode numbers.
And I saw Tommy in our Discord pointed out when we did episode 464. He said, no mention of the Amstrad. What's going on?
Yes, you see. So 486. We're going to definitely talk about SNES games.
Yes, because that's how well we planned this.
But I did not have a 486. I went straight to Pentium. God, can you believe it?
You are. Someone did well back in the 90s, Brad.
It's one of the cheap ones later on. I stuck too long to other systems. But did you have one?
No, I stuck with I was Amiga till 2001. I think my first PC was I think it was one of those AMD Semprons, really budget kind of crappy PC that I literally used as a slave drive for my Amiga 1200. So
I admired 486s from a distance.
Yeah, I remember when they first came out. I remember lots of talk in the school playground about them. People for some reason getting weirdly excited, even though they were only about 11 years old or something. But I do remember chatter about the new Intel machine. It's always weird that they didn't call the Pentium the 586, though. I always wondered why that wasn't a thing.
It's all about the Pentiums, baby.
Yeah, that song wouldn't have worked as well otherwise, would it?
Cheesy.
But this week, as you mentioned, we are going to be talking some PC gaming, but a lot of Super Nintendo as well, with our special guest this week, who's actually had some great company in his career over the years. Worked very closely with Rebecca Heinemann of Interplay fame, Burger Becky. Of course, we did have on the podcast very early on, didn't we?
Yeah, and Burger Becky's an absolutely amazing programmer. And, Alan Anderson met up with her and also kind of got taught by her as well, which was really interesting. Back in the days, he was an Apple II cracker. So he had that kind of history and background of machine code.
We love hearing stories about the underground, don't we? Like the piracy scene.
Yeah, and the BBS as well, and those really early days. But, Rebecca Heinemann was at Interplay and Silicon and Synapse as well, which later became Blizzard. Did a lot of games with Interplay. And, we get the story of Lost Vikings, which is an absolutely amazing title. Wing Commander as well. A lot of talk of Alan Adham, who was a co-founder of Silicon and Synapse, and lots of internal stories. But interestingly, Alan worked on the SNES as well. So he worked on a lot of SNES titles, Rock and Roll Racing, but also the Game Genie for the SNES, which is a really interesting device.
Yeah. Did you ever have any like devices like that? Do you have a Game Genie or anything back in the day, Joe?
No. No.
Yeah. I was never posh enough to have anything like that either. It was like just cheat codes from magazines and stuff. But I remember seeing them on TV. Except the way they worked, you'd put them into, there's two versions, wasn't there? There's one for the NES, and then I remember there was a lawsuit. Nintendo sued them and blocked it. And then they did one for the Super Nintendo as well, which I think was very short-lived. I've got a feeling Codemasters did the UK version of it that never made it to market, but it did get released in America.
I don't think Nintendo were very happy
No.
with it, were they? I think that's an amazing device. It's great to hear about that, but also Wing Commander, of course, and stuff that he did with Software Toolworks, and then later on, a little bit of Winamp as well, which is one of my favourite programs.
And there's some stories about a game that could have been Driver back in the day. It's kind of the prototype to Driver. You know, Driver was very, I think, heavily influenced by what they read about it, because that came out later on. A game that was cancelled that should have come out on the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation, the original PlayStation, called Propaganda.
Yes, we covered it in the news recently, actually. So great to hear about that. And, you know, what Alan has in the basement as well, stored away.
Yeah, because there has been a lot of people desperate to see a bit more about that game. We do try and find out a bit more about whether any of it remains, and kind of twist his arm a bit maybe to have a little look in his archives, and fingers crossed we'll definitely keep on at that. But some incredible stories coming up with this week's special guest, Alan Anderson. He's on the show in around half an hour from now. But of course, first half of the podcast, that's when we talk about what's been making the headlines in the world of retro gaming and technology from over the last week. The stories that have been landing on our timelines. And I've got to say, guys, still haven't got my hands on a Switch 2. You know, I was thinking about getting one the other week. I've kind of been looking, I haven't been trying too hard, if I'm honest, but I had a look around in Asda when I went there the other day, completely sold out. Looked in Sainsbury's, that had gone. I saw in Argos you could maybe get them if the phase of the moon's right and you time it certain time of day on their website. But I'm finding that Switch 2 still seems quite in demand here in the UK, still very short supplies. It's weird though, because I've got friends that are like, you can just walk into Argos and pick one up. I don't know, I'm just getting unlucky.
I was going to say, I thought you could just buy them, to be fair, like off Amazon. Like, no problem.
Nothing on there, still just the games. But I know a lot of them are out there. I did read that apparently it has become the most successful console launch in history. So I see a lot of Switch 2s out there at the moment. I'm sure I'll get one eventually. But a lot of people were excited to play GameCube games on the Switch, which is a service we talked about actually a few months ago, didn't we, when it was announced before the launch of the Switch 2, that there's going to be GameCube games that you can play via emulation, similar to the original Switch, where you can play, NES, SNES, and N64 games and Mega Drive. There's a kind of a virtual console on there that allows you to play GameCube games. But our friend Dimitris from Modern Vintage Gamer has made a video detailing the fact that the GameCube emulation might not be all that on the Switch 2.
Yeah, I've heard a couple of things about it. So obviously, like you say, we covered it. It's, people have been really excited about it. There's the GameCube controller for the Switch 2 as well. And, the library that they've announced for it is a lot of rare sought after games on there, as well as big hitters, like Mario Sunshine, stuff like that. But yeah, there's been a few murmurs of kind of like, if you're a bit of a retro game purist and, it's not just there for kind of like a little bit of a few hours on the GameCube, a little bit of like nostalgia. If you actually really, really want to play these games, play, the whole way through Fire Emblem, for example, you may run into a few problems, which aren't the most like obvious issues.
They're not game breaking, are they? Yeah.
They're not game breaking at all. They're things that like maybe I could probably live with, but apparently there is some input lag issues with it, as well as sensitivity and calibration issues to the analog sticks. Now, I'm not too sure if that means on the analog sticks of the GameCube controller, or just like generally playing with any controller on the Switch 2 with the GameCube emulation, that it's just like an input issue that seems to be pointing to. And then there's some online performance issues, which, I think that will get fixed in due time. Like you're going to see those kind of issues, those kind of teething issues of online issues with any sort of like new console, new game, or new app for a console.
Did the N64 ones get fixed?
Yeah, I mean, there were some that was really janky. A lot of the N64 emulation on the original Switch when it first launched. It has got a lot better over the last couple of years. So they did improve it. So you're right, Joe. That leads me to think that obviously this is version 1. Yeah. So they're going to see the problem. And the hardware in the Switch 2 is easily capable of emulating.
Well, the Wii can do it. So, the Switch 2.
Which the Wii was basically had GameCube hardware, though, didn't it? So that was a bit different. I think
that wasn't emulated.
Maybe because different architecture. And, the Wii U, I'm going to stick with that at the moment. But, of course,
till you die.
The new titles.
Wii U forever.
But I understand that. For purists, that is disappointing. And I've got to be honest, I do find, even though I wouldn't consider myself a hardcore GameCube gamer, I think having input lag, it can be really frustrating though, because games that are kind of pixel perfect and you need impeccable timing for. I've played games before via emulation, I'm like, I don't remember being that bad playing this, and then I played it on original hardware and I'm actually all right at it. So it can be, those like couple of milliseconds can make a difference in some games. So I do see why people
Smash Bros and stuff like that, definitely. Having that lag would annoy a lot of people and make them not want to play it. So I think it's something, but thank God we've got patches and updatable ways of doing it, so I'm sure they'll fix that, because Nintendo doesn't want bad headlines about its new console.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said at the start of the story then, Joe, they've actually got an official GameCube controller that you can buy for the Switch 2. So they're obviously taking, that online capability of Switch 2 GameCube gaming seriously, aren't they? The fact they've gotten the effort of releasing a dedicated controller. So it's definitely not just an afterthought,
I think like backwards compatibility with computers is always something that happens, or consoles, and it's never really right in the first place. Even when they had the like PlayStation 2 coming out with the PlayStation games, and there's always something that needs to be fixed, or there's always like a little problem. Eventually it gets ironed out, but I don't think there's been one where it's kind of come out perfect. Maybe I could be wrong, but it does seem something that's like more users get on board, the better it will get.
And we're getting to this stage now where with like GameCube, it's obviously more complicated hardware that they're emulating there than like an NES, for example.
Never be a first adopter.
That's it. I mean, MVG in his video, looking at it, he only plays with the built-in Joy-Cons. He doesn't use the GameCube controller, but it looks more like a software issue, so I can't imagine that would make much of a difference, but I'd be interested to kind of see how that compares. But I think it's like, it's a day one release. I'm sure Nintendo will pay attention and, fix it up. Some people have commented that, like, really though, if you're a hardcore purist, you probably still have an original GameCube and play on that.
Oh, you took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah. But I'm also thinking, some people in the comments are also like, I noticed it straight away. So if it is a game where, you get an input lag, and I think, even if you're a fan of that game, it's not going to be a satisfactory experience, I don't think. So hopefully Nintendo will get on it, and there'll probably be an update out fixing it before the podcast even comes out. I'm confident in that. So if you want to check out MVG's video and see why the GameCube emulation on the Switch isn't that great at launch, but fingers crossed we'll get sorted out, I'll link that in this week's show notes. Now, something that you might be quite excited about, Ravi. I was when I read this headline, till I kind of drilled down a bit and I was a bit like, meh. But this has been in quite a few places this week. And it is quite good news for the people who bought this company. You remember Maplin?
Oh, God, of course I remember Maplin, yeah.
Explain what Maplin was for our non-UK listeners.
Maplin was essentially a store full of everything that you needed for tech. It had electronic kits. It had like little LEDs. The way the store was laid out, you had your components and your standard cables and stuff like that. Later on, it got to expensive gold-plated HDMI cables that no one really wanted and stuff. But you had your basics there. You could just buy cable from there. You could buy components. There was a person at the very back in a little kind of shack that you could go in and be like, oh, do you have this capacitor or this resistor? And they'd look it up and they'd find it. The staff were really knowledgeable.
Sometimes I think they were too knowledgeable, because I remember going to the one in Nottingham once and asking the guy there, and he went, we've got, oh my God, that's ridiculously overpriced. Just get one off eBay.
Well, I tried to like impress the Maplin skills with my like prowess, like, oh, he's buying a new PSU. Like, is that going to impress?
Totally didn't need it.
Yeah.
I love Ravi's way of flirting.
Yeah, and no, it was great. I remember going when I was younger, buying I just wanted a metal enclosure case, and they had one like for sale, drill holes in it. Asked for loads of components. They're like, "What's this for?" I'm not really going to tell you, but yeah, kind of stuff like that. It was really good, and also these little electronic kits that they had when you were a kid. You could solder together and do stuff like make a little Christmas tree, and all the LEDs would go. It was fantastic for picking up something. It declined over the years. Got more expensive trying to get toys in and stuff like that, but originally it was really good.
Maplin as a company were originally set up in Raleigh in Essex in 1972 by a couple, Roger and Sandra Allen, and their business partner Doug Simmons. Originally started as a mail order business, and then opened the first shop in 1976 in Westcliff-on-Sea in Essex, and then by the year 2018 had 200 stores around the UK and employing more than 2,500 people. Unfortunately, went bankrupt that year, couldn't find a buyer, and all the stores closed down. I've actually got a video on my YouTube channel that I did back in 2018 of my final visit to Maplin's in Nottingham.
Actually, I need to check that out.
Yeah, I just walk around.
You did that.
Yeah, I'd like to watch it again, actually, because that'd be quite nostalgic. It's weird because I put that video up, and then I've got a feeling when we first started the podcast, and not long after, that'd have been about 2 years in, there's a guy who actually worked there who listened to the podcast. So if he still does, sorry, I can't remember your name, but I remember you reached out afterwards and said, "I'll listen to your show." Maplin by the end, they were ridiculously overpriced.
Yeah.
The only reason I would ever go in there is if I needed something that day.
Desperation was their market at the very end. Yeah, it wasn't going out to kind of get it. And like, I could understand it with a lot of online things and people being able to order and shipping being a lot cheaper and stuff. But they really did kind of ramp up the prices for like an obscure HDMI adapter or something like that.
I remember once I needed it might have been just a VGA cable, and I was working on something on like a PC on a Saturday morning. I had like a Saturday and I needed a wire for it. And I can order it off Amazon, wait a couple of days. Or I can go to town to Maplin, then they charged me about 16 quid. And I remember so many times when he went in, the staff would be like, "Oh my God, that's a stupid price." But again, you need it there and then. And I do miss that occasionally, if I'm working on something. Obviously, you can get stuff off Amazon in 24 hours, sometimes even sooner now. But the story here is that apparently the Maplin name was rescued back then. And I do remember reading that it lived on as an online-only retailer. They set that up the year after in 2019. And apparently the sales are doing really well. They reckon they're up 14% on last year. So they're actually, if you read this article here it's on the Evening Standard's website, does feel like a bit of an advert for a marketing company.
It's weird, isn't it? Like, we're in a future where there's a lot of technology. There's a lot of like components. Kids are interested in stuff like the Raspberry Pi, and there's not a high street store that's, accommodating that.
Apart from the Raspberry Pi store in Cambridge, there is that.
Yes, but that's a bit of a trek, isn't it?
Unless you live in Cambridge. This article's really just about how, their online advertising is to thank for it. But I think it's interesting that they are actually, according to this, getting stronger by the day, and are still doing well as an online-only retailer. It's interesting. Some people are like, well, Maplin started as a mail order company, so they've really kind of gone back to roots. But I'm trying to think of an occasion when I would buy something off them as opposed to just getting it off Amazon.
Have you visited the Maplin's website since it's gone to online only?
No, I must admit, I'd actually completely forgotten that it had a website until I read this article. So I'm clicking on it now. Looks a bit kind of, how would you say, a bit PC World crossed with AliExpress.
If there's still 61 Wimpies in the UK, then I'm sure they could have
that was one thing I was thinking is, if the brand is starting to do well again, do you think maybe they will expand and kind of dip the toe into setting up some shops again?
A flagship store or something. Yeah. I'd love to see it, but I'll probably visit once and then get the bag. It'd be like that last Blockbuster, wouldn't it?
Well, I'm trying to see what the prices are like now. I'm looking here. So if you want to buy a USB-A cable to Apple Lightning, basically an old iPhone phone charging wire, £7.
Yeah, I go to the
Maplin.
market stall
Yeah.
with a little phone shop to get my stuff there.
Or Amazon 79p. So, I think I'm still kind of struggling to see a use case. It's cool to see the brand kind of living on, but I think kind of what doomed them on the high street. I'm surprised to see that the people are still going to them. I mean, there's got to be certain things that maybe, a specialised electronics retailer could offer that other businesses can't. And I do agree with you, Ravi. It is a bit of a shame that there is nowhere now to go out and buy a capacitor pack or something if you need one in, or an electronics kit for kids. It would be cool if like Asda or something started selling that in their electronics sections, but maybe there's not quite the demand for Raspberry Pis by general supermarket shoppers. But I do wish Maplin good luck with their comeback, though. And, if they ever do make it back to brick and mortar, I'll definitely pay them a visit and do a welcome back Maplin video for my channel. How's about that for a promise? Now, next story, this one is quite interesting. A lot of people are getting a bit upset over this story. And I'll read the headline on Time Extension's article. It's a middle finger to everybody. The producer behind Netflix Castlevania and Devil May Cry series is now working on Duke Nukem next. Why is this getting people upset then, Joe?
So this fella, is it A.D. Shankar? Is a Hollywood producer who I didn't realise, done a lot of big Hollywood films kind of like in the 2010s. But he's moved on to, he works with Netflix now and he's been behind a lot of their series. Didn't he butcher Castlevania? That's the big complaint I keep seeing. People saying he completely ruined it. So he did Castlevania and he's just done Devil May Cry. And Castlevania did it get 3 seasons? And then they did moved on to the Rondo of Blood game, which I haven't caught yet. And I quite enjoyed the Castlevania series, but some people, it's kind of split down the middle, and they've said the same with the Devil May Cry series. People either really enjoyed it or said like they've butchered it, it's too far removed from the story, or they're using characters from different timelines and different games and, sticking it all in this one series, which, is bound to happen sometimes with these huge franchises. I'm not massively into Devil May Cry. I know enough about it, but I've not watched it. But he was recently being interviewed by Esquire, and they said, what are you working on next? And he said he's actually bought the rights to Duke Nukem, not the game, but the rights to make an animated TV show. And he's bought it from Gearbox. So, for me, I think that's a given that he's probably going to do Duke Nukem next. But what he says is, he goes on to say, is Duke Nukem was a middle finger to everybody. And Duke Nukem, when it blew up in the 90s, everybody started trying to take a piece of the pie and, trying to make it like a huge kind of like brand, but it never really happened. And he says that's because the point of Duke Nukem was it can't be made corporate because he's a middle finger to it all, because he's badass and he's rude. So I think the headline is kind of like, I saw that headline the other day and I was like, it's a middle finger to everybody. And I thought he was saying because they want to make a Duke Nukem TV show, like because the corporation want to do it, it's like a middle finger to the legacy of Duke Nukem. And I was a bit like, huh?
Well, a lot of the comments are saying that, though. They're like, oh, please don't get him involved. He's going to spoil it. So, I mean, it kind of works both ways. Yeah.
I don't quite get that kind of response saying it can't be made by a corporation, because Duke Nukem, like the game, it was dragged through the dirt. Like Duke Nukem Forever is a legendary story of, companies
corporate sloppiness.
Corporate sloppiness. Yeah.
And I think that's his point. But then the irony of it is, it's probably going to be done through Netflix.
Yeah.
And it was public domain at the beginning, and I'm sure Duke has been put in every form. I think it could work. They need to get John St. John on the board.
That's what I was thinking.
I've got him on Facebook from when we interviewed him, a few years ago. And he does actually always wish me a happy birthday and stuff, which I think is so cool that, the voice of Duke Nukem wishes me a happy birthday every year. But he shared this article the other day, and he said at the very least, I would be happy if they reached out to me, like to just kind of like get his thoughts on it.
I'd like the premise of Duke Nukem going into the modern world and trying to fit in and like trying to become a hipster, having a top knot. Kind of,
I can kind of see, because I mean, in my mind, it's like, and some people are pointing this out, kind of how modern sensibilities and Duke Nukem that is firmly in that campy mid-90s kind of sexist era how that would work with like modern audiences on Netflix. And someone's actually made a good point here saying it would be kind of cool if Duke Nukem was almost like they compare it to Cobra Kai, like Johnny on Cobra Kai, like a man out of time who's a bit stuck in the past and hasn't really moved on with the world. That could kind of work in like an ironic kind of funny way.
In a kind of maybe a Leisure Suit Larry kind of manner. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Duke Nukem is amazing, and there are a few great games. But yeah, I think, I don't know, animation, I'd still love to see a live action.
Live action Duke Nukem.
Yeah, I think that would be wicked. Like someone beefed up, roided up with The Rock.
The Rock, yeah.
Yeah, Dwayne Johnson is Duke Nukem.
Well, I'm thinking if John St. John can't do the voice, at least get LGR to do it. I think Clinton could do a good voiceover for it, so that could work. Interesting to see that. I mean, I'm not a huge Castlevania or Devil May Cry fan. I haven't watched those, so I can't comment on whether they're any good or not. I know they have divided fans of the series, which they always are. I mean, I know Castlevania in particular, very long-running franchise, isn't it? It's always going to have really hardcore fans who've got an idea in their head about how it should be, and if it doesn't match their idea of it, then it's going to upset them. So I understand that. And Duke Nukem, I think, is probably quite similar. So there is lots of ways it could get it wrong, but also it could be awesome. So
wouldn't it be ironic if he just puts it in development hell for 20 years?
Yeah. That'd really stick to the legacy of Duke Nukem, wouldn't it? So,
and like the animation keeps changing as new engines come out.
Yeah. New actors come along, yeah. So, interesting though. We'll keep an eye on that story. So if there's going to be more, I'll put that in this week's show notes. As I will this video as well, because this looks very cool now. It's been a while actually since we talked about the power of the Amstrad CPC. Obviously, we did a big episode, didn't we, last year, celebrating the CPC's 40th birthday with Roland Perry, which was an awesome episode. I see Roland's actually been doing the rounds at a few events as well over the last few months, getting out there. And this is something else that's really impressive. Now, I think this kind of started for me when we saw that incredible Pinball Fantasies release on the CPC, probably going back almost a decade ago. Batman Group, I think, wasn't it, who brought that out? Which was just jaw-dropping. So I remember as a kid, my friend Graham had an Amstrad CPC at school. I think it was his big brother's, but we were allowed to play in it when he was out. And I remember playing Ghostbusters on there, and it had the little spoken speech sample at the beginning, Ghostbusters, at the start.
That was fantastic.
Yeah, it's exactly how it sounded, actually. And he had a green screen monitor, though. So I remember us trying to play games on like a green screen, which was quite standard.
I do remember being huddled around a green screen, playing Rampage on the CPC as well.
Alan Sugar must have got a job lot of them cheap or something, because every CPC owner seemed to have one. But actually, turns out the CPC is graphically very capable when you view it in colour. And I always remember as a kid actually getting games like Paperboy and stuff like that on my Commodore Plus 4. And they generally wouldn't show the Plus 4 screenshots on the back of the tapes, because it was normally, the graphics were terrible compared to the 64 and the Spectrum. But I remember always looking at screenshots of Amstrad games and thinking, that looks really nice. So, it's a very capable machine. And this would have been huge had this come out back in the day. Someone's actually brought the Rainbow Arts Classic Turrican back to the Amstrad CPC with an incredible remaster of it for the Amstrad CPC 128K.
It looks stunning. I must admit the frame rate made me feel slightly sick. I don't know what it would be like running on an actual machine and seeing it, but watching the video, I'm just not used to those old frame rates anymore.
I've got a feeling it's smoother on the C64. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, it is an impressive piece, definitely. You've got it seems a bit kind of chunky and clunky, but the colors are really popping in there. You've got a lot of enemies on screen, but also, of course, with me, Turrican soundtrack, love it, and love hearing that out of the Amstrad as well.
There's a few differences, because it did come out on the Amstrad back in the day, and actually got really well reviewed. 90% in Amstrad Action magazine back in 1991. They called the game Totally Crucial. It came out on US Gold's budget
That's
range
such
as well.
a 90s,
Totally crucial, dude.
Totally crucial.
And then, I mean, it was very well received back then and was a decent version of it. But the reason these developers, these are two fans of the game called One Vision and JMB, they've gone back to kind of see what they can improve and match it a bit more closely to the Amiga and Atari ST version. So they've redesigned the hub in there. They've improved the music as well. The big change that I can see from comparing it to the original is the main character. He actually looks a hell of a lot more like Turrican, like he did in Turrican for the Atari ST and the Amiga. Yeah. Whereas in the Amstrad one, he looked totally different. So
and the palette's really nice in it.
Beautiful, yeah. Almost reminds me. I think a bit like kind of Master System looking. The palette in it. Yeah, some really bold colours in there as well. So yeah, I think really nice, and it's always nice to see platforms like the CPC getting some love, and it is a free download if you want to get hold of that. Only 103 downloads so far, so considering it's free, should be higher than that, I think. So if you want to get hold of that, show your CPC some love this summer and get hold of a nice new version of Turrican for it. I'll put that link in this week's show notes as well. Now, just one final story before we get into our interview this week. Patreon's got a few more on the way, though, don't worry. This is quite sad. I'm holding in my hand the very last issue of a magazine that launched in the UK 25 years ago. Now, it's in shops now. I've actually seen people, eBay scalpers, selling this for ridiculous amounts on eBay, but I walked into my local Asda and picked a copy of it up last week. This is Linux Format Magazine. Now, I thought this was worth a mention because, like I said, it's been going since the year 2000. I remember first seeing Linux Format when Amiga Format closed down. Because remember, Amiga Format was...
Future Publishing.
Which is actually still the publisher of Linux Format. So it's kind of I've got a feeling there might only be one format magazine left now. I think Mac Format is still going. It's
mad because Linux is a system that's more popular than ever.
Yeah.
And this is like the leading mag. I know there's others out there, like Linux Magazine. But yeah, my God, like it is such a depressing decline of magazines at the moment. I don't know how many we've covered that have been closing and into their last issue. I remember seeing Micromark go as well. Stuff
Games Master in the last few years.
Had for years. Yeah, the whole culture's dying, and it's really tough with places like Smith's reducing it. But I work for a magazine, Amiga Addict, and
new issue out now.
New issue out now, and our staff basically do it for love.
Yeah,
and I think every issue, it's risking closing. It's really tough, without that kind of passion and people subscribing and kind of helping keep it alive. I don't think it would happen commercially. I think Linux Format and stuff like that, they're going to have to pay all the staff. They're going to have to, get like equipment. They're going to have to get software,
hire
stuff
offices,
like that. Yeah, and it just doesn't work nowadays, and it's really tough to see, especially when someone like Future, who are the leading force in the kind of computer magazines, they're probably going to get more money out of some of their other brands, which I'm not quite sure what they are nowadays.
Retro Gamer, they still doing it, and they actually sponsored us for a while, Future Publishing, which was amazing back in the day, I remember. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's kind of like, with it being like the almost the end of the format magazines, which obviously started back in the 80s. You had ST Format and Amiga Format that was one magazine originally, then they broke into two, and then PC Format launched in the 90s.
It does feel like, when you got a video game console and there's a few games that come out at the very end, it's like that with magazines at the moment. There's a few left that are kind of coming out like, oh, someone's released another magazine. It's like, a real kind of odd time for it.
So I remember, because Amiga Format went till 2000.
Yes.
And then a lot of the staff that worked on Amiga Format moved over to Linux Format, like Nick Veach was the launch editor, who was, I think, was editor of Amiga Format for a while. Yeah. And Richard Drummond, who also worked on that, CU, I remember back in the day. But it's interesting, this last issue, I've got a feeling the staff were told, like, mid-production, Because if you read it, there's an intro, like, the introduction from the editor. He doesn't mention in there that it's the last issue.
And then halfway through there, they're all swearing.
Yeah, there's nothing on the cover that it's the last issue. But it turns out this is actually a 25 years celebration of the magazine. So they actually got Nick Veach and the original editors into a pub to talk about the old days. And then kind of at the end, you kind of get a few mentions that it's the last issue. So I've got a feeling it was probably dropped on them right at the end of production. So that's why they don't really go big on the fact that it's the last issue, but it kind of, works out quite well that it's a 25th anniversary issue that's a final one. But I think it is sad though, because I buy Amiga Addict, obviously, that you guys do. I buy PC Pro, and Linux Format was that the only other print mag that I got. So now it's just down to PC Pro and Amiga Addict. So
I'm going to say, I'll put an appeal out there for everyone. Just support your local game magazine. Support your stuff that's still coming out in print. Subscribe. There's Amiga Addict, there's Pixel Addict, but there's also Zap Amiga, there's Amiga Future, there's Ninty Fresh, I think it is, which is the Nintendo one. There's a few Sega ones out there as well. So
Debug magazine as well, if you like indie games.
Yeah, Debug's Retro Gamer. So have a look, just go out and kind of purchase one, or they might not be here, because at the moment it's like we're reading this week this magazine has gone, and then it keeps happening, and it does make me sad, really.
Use it or lose it, I think is
that's the word.
The lesson. So rest in peace, Linux Format. What a 25 years. So the last issue is available now. If you nip into your local Asda, you should find it this weekend. So if you want to check that out and the rest of the stories, I put them in the show notes. Now this weekend, favourite weekend of the month, the excited Joe, Sunday night, party time.
Party time. It's time to get down with the boys, but everybody is welcome.
Patrons Hangout.
Yeah, Patrons Hangout this Sunday, 8:00. British Mean Time. Is it Greenwich Mean Time? However you say it.
British Summertime now, aren't we?
British
BST,
Summertime. Yeah, man. Yeah, looking forward to it. Looking forward to trading war stories of what we've all been doing this month in terms of retroness. There's been a few games markets. There's been a few. It's summer, innit? So, there's been a few events on and stuff like that. But always look forward to it. Last Sunday of every month.
Yes, if you'd like to join us for that. Massive geek out, really, isn't it? Like a huge Zoom call that we do. All our patrons are welcome. Just chat about retro and all kinds of geekiness for a couple of hours.
You never know where it's going to go. That's the thing about the chat. 1 minute it could be one thing, 1 minute it could be another. We cover so many different aspects of tech and culture as well, and people's lives as well. We're talking about their setups that they've got. We've got new people joining as well. Such a good international bunch there as well. A huge mix. Like even just going on there and being able to talk to people from Europe, America. We even have some Aussies join us at
first thing in the morning.
First thing in the morning, and then we've got other people, having a beer late at night. So it's such a good mix, and we've all got that passion there for retro consoles and computers.
Real friendly bunch, yeah. So if you'd like to join us for that, it's coming up this weekend. Of course, plenty more perks to supporting the podcast on Patreon as well. We've just done a new episode of our Gold Members and Above podcast called The Retro Hour After Hours, talking about our retro firsts. And every episode of the normal podcast, patrons get an extra 10, 15 minutes of news stories because we chop all the ads out. So if you'd like to support us, that's the main reason to do it, though, just to make sure that we can keep the lights on and keep bringing out the podcast every week. All the details to join our wonderful patrons community are at theretrohour.com. All right, well, thanks for checking out the news this week. More for you on next Friday's show. And next, getting some incredible stories with our special guest, Alan Anderson, is next on the Retro Hour podcast.
You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and we're very grateful to be joined today by Alan Anderson. And Alan works for some fantastic companies. We've had Rebecca Heinemann on the podcast before as well and talked about Interplay. So we're going to go into the history of Interplay as well. But then also later on, Silicon and Synapse, which became Blizzard. There's an amazing title, Lost Vikings, that, we absolutely love. Amazing music on that as well. And
I can tell you the story of where Lost Vikings came from, so...
Well, can't wait for that. And we're going to also talk about his SNES developments, a lot of console stuff, but also Winamp, which really kicks the llama's ass. It's fantastic. Great to have you on, Alan. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on. It's the first retro podcast I've done to talk about those eras back then, but I'm excited to do it.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure you've got some amazing stories, and we have one question that we ask our guests, and that's what was your first video gaming experience that kind of stood out to you?
I was born and raised in a small town in Fort Smith, Arkansas. And there were no computers, no anything. But when I'd come home from junior high, I got $1 for my lunch. And I wouldn't eat my lunch. I'd come home, I'd go by the convenience store, and I would play video games. And that would be, back then, that would have been this thing called, probably nobody's ever heard of, called Blaster. And then Pac-Man, and then Galaga. And Galaga, to this day, is still one of my favorite all-time arcade machines. But those would be the first ones. Gosh, if you really want to go back farther, the Atari 2600. So, I still to this day remember my disappointment when Pac-Man came out and be like, really? Really? This is what we have? I've been looking forward to that for the longest time. And so, yeah, I guess the Atari 2600 and River Raid, pinball, the disappointment that was Pac-Man, Adventure, which is still one of my favorite all-time Atari games. Even when you know exactly how to do it, it's just a fun game to play. I mean, it's got a lot of replayability. So yeah, those would be the first ones, and then probably Pong, at a friend's house.
So definitely a strong sense of the arcade that originally got you into gaming. I mean, tell us about your first system then. You mentioned about getting your first computer. How did that happen then? Because, most computers weren't very affordable back then.
No, they were not. But I have really good parents. Like, we didn't have money, but we were a rich in family. And my dad said, he's like, these computer things I've heard, they're going to be. So they went to JCPenney's. And JCPenney's is going to be very relevant to this story later on. But and he went and got it on time, a TI-99-4A. And we got it home, and I played Hunt for the Wombat. And you can only hunt the wombat for so long. So after a couple hours, I'd figured out how to do the sound. We get closer, where you going? It's like, I need to do something. So I cracked open the manual for it, and I'd never heard of programming. I didn't know what it was. And it was this basic program, Hello World. And so I did Hello World, and that was the start of it in BASIC. And then I started writing. I thought, wow, I bet I could put my name on the screen if I do that. And so, I remember, so I've got a really strong memory for all things technical. Now I forget where my keys are very frequently. So, but I still remember in BASIC, it was like call char. It was, and now I know that was hexadecimal was the way that we were setting the bits on. So it was call this, call char, and obviously just BASIC. And I was able to put my name on the screen. I brought my parents in. And so I've been programming ever since.
Well, you're starting on the TI-99. Now, how did you move on to the Apple II then? Because I know you're quite well known on the Apple II scene.
So we didn't have the money to buy an Apple II, but there was a local community college called Westart Community College, and they had a computer lab, and they were teaching. I'm going to date myself on this one big time. They were teaching 6809 and 6502 assembly language to their electronics students actually, and I don't know what it was, but I found out about it. I came in and I said, man, I love computers. I want to program, and they let me come in, and I was like 12, 11, something like that, 12. And I remember I used to have these two big disc banks. You remember those things with 5.25, discs? And I carried my big disc banks around, all over the place. And they'd let me play games, and they'd let me program. I helped the other students there. And so it was probably about, I don't know, the TI-99-4A was probably about 6 months. And then I started going to the Westart. And it was just down the street. So it was, I could walk there in, 5-10 minutes and come back. And, my parents would get upset when I come back late at night, but, that's how I learned how to program.
I heard you mention that you were in a cracking group as well, an Apple II cracking group to me earlier. I was wondering how you got involved with that and how that also helped your understanding of how games were developed and programmed.
Yeah. So actually it might have been so it was in 10th grade. So that would have been 14, 15 when I got my Apple II. Apple IIGS actually is the first Apple II I had, although I started with Apple IIes and even now to start on Apple IIs. And so I quickly found out what BBSs were and bulletin board systems, and kind of got into those. And then I got into this is so embarrassing because back in the day, this was really cool stuff, right? The Wears scene. And
I still think that's cool. Don't worry.
Oh yeah, we love it.
And it wasn't long till I got in because I knew how to program from, that's the only way I could do anything is, I taught myself how to program assembly because just basic couldn't really do the things you needed to do to play video games. And my TI-99 was not powerful enough. And by the way, did you know that TI-99 if you put too many program statements in and you hit that 4K limit, it deletes the entire RAM. It resets all of RAM. So you could have spent, I don't know, several days making something and just one character too many and it's gone. Yeah, I found that out the hard way. So, but yeah, so that's how I got into the Apple II programming is, and kind of the cracking groups and everything is once I started getting onto BBSs, then I started getting into, things that the statute of limitations has run out for. So yay me on that one. And I started, nationally calling BBSs. I found out what cracking was. I knew how to program at that time. So I started getting into some of the cracking groups and I became their cracker. And about, I don't know, a year of that. And I started my own group, which I'm not going to tell you which one it was. You can probably find it if you look hard enough. But just remember, I was 14 and 15 and 16. So the Wares scene was, it was what it was. So.
It fascinates us as well because the Apple scene obviously was not that big in the UK. So, hearing about this whole cracking scene there as well as the Texas Instruments machines, they're just totally alien to us guys. So really great to hear. Was there like a lot of people with Apples then and a lot of your peers?
Yeah, it was. So it was mostly US because there was an old service called PC Pursuit that, most people probably never even heard of. And what it did was it allowed you to call into a local number and then you would connect to another city through the PC Pursuit. It was like one of the first packet switch networks would be my guess. Other than that French one that, anyway, you get onto that. And that way you wouldn't have to call long distance. You could just get, your parents to get you a subscription to it. And I think it was something really inexpensive. It was like $10 a month or something. And that way you could get onto all these boards. Now, the downside was the speed of it was not very good. So, there were times when I would crack stuff that they would have to mail me the disk. Remember, because back in the day, it was very organized. You had your suppliers, you had your, Wares pusher, you had the various parts of it. What the funny part about all this is, though, is you have to remember, I had an entire programming career before 18, before I ever started programming professionally.
Yeah.
So,
and it was structured as well. Like you said, there was a business, there was a structure to the whole cracking scene.
And by the way, I do regret it. I'm sorry. All the guys, stuff that I cracked, I didn't know. I was a young teenager. But anyway, so, once I started to graduate from high school, it's funny because I had never intended to be a programmer. That was just something I just enjoyed doing. I mean, I was in small town Fort Smith, Arkansas. It wasn't like there were programmers, running around. I mean, I knew the people at Westark, but they were mostly people getting into electrical engineering. They weren't really getting into, programming as a thing. I was going to be a musician. I was a trumpet player. I practiced 4 to 6 hours every day. I was first in the state, and full ride scholarships pretty much anywhere I wanted to go in Arkansas. And so my plan was that I was going to go be a trumpet performance major. And this is where JCPenney's and Rebecca get back into the picture. But about, I'd say a month before I graduated high school, and I graduated young. I was still 17. About a month before, there was a Future Business Leaders of America, very official sounding, right? But club in a high school club. I don't know if they still exist, but there was an FBLA thing that we had to get a suit for. And when I mean a suit, I mean, just like a coat jacket or whatever. So my mother brought me to JCPenney's in Central Mall in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Again, relevant to the story. And I went in and we went to get a suit for me. Like, we didn't have much money, so that's where we got it. And I got to talking to the guy who was fitting me for the suit. And I was telling him, I said, I'm going to go get music performance degree from University of Arkansas. It's going to be amazing. I'm going to play trumpet worldwide. It's going to be the most fun thing in the world. And he was so excited. He was like, man, you're going to love it. I have the 5-year music performance degree from the University of Arkansas. So I walked out of JCPenney's that day, and it was funny because I remember it as if it were yesterday. It was like 3 p.m. in the afternoon. The clouds were overcast, and I thought to myself, oh, I got to do something else. I got to take a different direction because that's not going to be me. So I got home and I started thinking, all right, well, I know this programming thing. I wonder if there's any money in that. And I like video games. That'd be fun. So I took my 2 favorite games, which was Strike Fleet, and I think that was Bryan Cranston, maybe some of the name. And then Bart's Tale, which is Bill Hyman at the time, now Rebecca Hyman, obviously. Mm-hmm. And my idea was, well, I'll just call them and find out what school they went to, and I'll just do what they did, and I'll get a job programming video games. Again, when you're 17, you don't know what you can't do, so you just do it. So I called it.
How did your parents react to that? Did you tell them at the time?
They'd lived with me all their life. They weren't surprised. So just like, all right, well, go for it. So my dad was a factory worker. My mom's a teacher. And just better parents than I deserved. So anyway, so I called Electronic Arts and asked to speak to Brian. And they blew me off. They're like, he's busy right now. Click. And then I called the Interplay. And I got a hold of the receptionist. And Rebecca will tell you the name of her name. I forget her name. But I said, hey, can I talk to Rebecca? And she said, Rebecca's sick right now, but I can give you, she had a very southern accent. I can give you his phone number. And so I was like, all right, sure.
That wouldn't happen today.
No. So anyway, I called Rebecca her house and I got the answering machine. And I don't know if you remember back in the day, answering machines would play for the person who had the machine. It wasn't, digital like it is now. And so I got the answering machine. I was like, but I went on, and I was like, man, I love your games. I would love to speak to you sometime. I'm a programmer too, and she picked up. So like 30 seconds in, she picked up, and we ended up talking for about, 2.5 hours on programming, video games, stuff she'd done, all that kind of stuff. And at the end, she's like, this has been a really fun conversation. I really am actually sick. I got to go, but it's been great talking to you. I said, wait. And I said, one second. I said, the reason why I called you is like, I just wanted to know, where'd you go to school? What did you do to get your job? And, there was a pause. I was like, oh man, I pissed her off. And what I know now, she was just like, this guy's an idiot. So she's like, you know how to program 65H16 assembly? I said, yeah. I said, and she's like, did you know the Super Nintendo runs on the 65H16? There might be CH16, and by the way, I didn't know that. So, and she's like, we're dying for programmers. You want a job? So off to Interplay, I went 2 weeks out of high school. So, and the thing is now I know, because when I first went out there, I thought, well, man, this is crazy. I don't know how to program. I realized I'd been programming for 6 years. I was already well into my career. And so, the first game I worked on was, RPM 2, now known as Rock and Roll Racing. But anyway, that's the story of how I got my first job. I didn't know I couldn't do that. It turns out I could.
Yeah, that's an incredible route into the industry. Just having the nerve to do it. Yeah, it's often a big part.
I didn't know. Yeah.
Well, how important was with shows like Comdex? I heard you had quite an interesting trip there. It's something involving the back of a van.
Yeah. That Alex Villagrand, another guy I knew from the cracking scene. I think he was I don't think he'd mind me telling you, the transmogrifier or something like that. He was actually the one doing micro league baseball, and I was helping a little bit. We all were. And Adham's parents' van, which is relevant to several of the stories we may or may not get to today. Mount Rigornio involved as well. But people don't realize back then Comdex actually was somewhat of a video game show as well. Like they definitely had video game stuff. E3 didn't come around till sometime later when we were, going to those shows and everything. And previously it was like CES and Comdex, and that was pretty much it. So, but yeah, they were adding features to micro league baseball, and Alex was in the back seat with a Mac. I don't remember if it was a Mac SE30 or a Mac SE or whatever it was, but it was it shouldn't have been worked on in the back of the van, but we were adding features. So it's funny too, once we get to the show, features kept getting added through the show. So if you were paying attention, you saw that it was getting better and better throughout the show. So, but yeah, that was, Comdex. There was a lot of, I can tell you so many stories from Comdex too, just funny stuff that happened. I remember on the way back, some reporter lady was, sitting next to me in the van, and she was talking about how OS2 was going to be all that. I was like, I really don't think it's going to. So, but yeah, that was Comdex, and it wasn't as video game centric, I guess, as CES was at the time. But it was, I guess, more of the stories from back then are just more interpersonal, things that happened, funny things that happened there. But like Alex disappearing in the middle of the night in Vegas, and us calling around trying to find him, and the hospitals and such. So and then he walks in at 10 a.m. The next day, like nothing happened, and
yeah, because I forgot that was held in Las Vegas, wasn't it? Yeah, that must have been a recipe for some adventures.
I was young, and I was from Backwater, Arkansas. I didn't know. This was the culture shock when I first came to LA from Arkansas was tremendous. I mean, just absolutely tremendous. A lot of things that I had grown up taking as gospel weren't really true. And I'm very glad that I got that, because, just my perspective on life in general just opened up, considerably.
And Interplay was a really young company as well, wasn't it?
Interplay was a very young company. I remember Fargo and some of the others used to have a poker game every Friday night that they would do, and all the CEOs from the various companies. I think Adham went there as well. I'm not sure if Moorheim did, but they would all go there and talk about the various things. And Silicon Synapse, and I still have my business card from Silicon Synapse, believe it or not. That I'll see if I can scan and send to you guys just for fun, right?
Right.
Silicon Synapse was brand new, and it was funded by Adham and Moorheim's parents. They'd given a lot of money, and I know that for two reasons. One, because they told us, but two, because early on, Alan Adham turned me on to Quicken, and so he gave me his Quicken for the company, and he didn't really delete the files for it. So I get to see all the companies fight. They were doing really well. So, but
let's step back a few steps then. 'Cause you mentioned that you're at Interplay now. You got the job after being on the phone to Becky. So tell us about when you first arrived at Interplay then, and when you first met Becky in person.
You mean when Adham cheated me out of my lunch money? Because he did that. So
tell us about that.
When I went there, my parents gave me, what little they could, to go out there, because I had to eat before my first paycheck. So I had a lot of money. So I get there, and it was actually in the evening, and Adham and some other people were there, and they were playing RPM1, which Adham had written from, Racing Destruction Set, right? He converted it from Racing Destruction Set 6502 into, 65816, although it was still just mostly 6502, CO2 code. But anyway, so he plays me in one game and he sandbags. And then we go to play another one, and he's like, "Oh, I'll bet you I can beat you." And I'm thinking, I'm a pretty good video game player. I can beat him. He wiped the floor with me and took my $10. So yeah, I learned that day. I got a little wiser, a little more knowledgeable.
Well, what was the kind of setup then at Interplay? Because you mentioned that you went on to Rock and Roll Racing, which was a SNES console title.
Right.
And so there was a lot of people working on PC as well. So, yeah.
Well, Pat was working on Battle Chess CD, and there's a story on Rep 30 that we might be able to get to. But so Interplay was the publisher. So Interplay had several dev shops like Silicon and Synapse. So I wasn't working for Interplay. I was working for Silicon and Synapse. So what happened was Heinemann and Adham were friends already. They'd just been friends from before. And so when I talked to Heinemann actually sent me to Adham, and they're the ones who hired me at Silicon and Synapse. Silicon and Synapse did SNES titles. Frank Pierce was in the front doing an Amiga title. And by the way, every time somebody says, "Love you, Frank," every time somebody says that Frank was one of the founders, he was the receptionist. He was like his desk was at the front door as you came in. if you look at the old pictures of it, and he was working on an Amiga title that they were trying to sell to people. But I don't mean to disparage Frank. Frank's a super nice guy, and you know, I of all the people there, he was probably one of the most level-headed people that we talked to. But he was doing Amiga. A lot of the titles that were being done there were Super Nintendo. Pat was working on some PC stuff. And like I said, he did Battle Chess CD. I know that he had worked on Micro League Baseball some until Alex, who was my friend, came in. And Alex took over Micro League Baseball and from Pat. And, Pat was doing it. And I remember one famous bug that we had that we all worked on briefly was a Rep 30 where it crossed the page boundary into the next one. And it was like literally the hardest bug to find ever. And but yeah, that's what was being worked on. And once RPM 1 came out and was successful, they decided to do RPM 2. And so that's where I came in. Now, one of the things that RPM had done that nobody else had really done before is they used the super high res mode. And the super high res mode, is kind of their, reason to market and that kind of thing. But the thing was, you couldn't do hardly anything on it. I mean, it really ate up RAM like crazy. You had almost no RAM to do anything, video RAM, right? And so, so early on in RPM 2, we decided to take it back to, and I remember when Adham and Moran went to talk with Fargo at Interplay, and we were just down the street from Interplay. I don't know if you guys know much about Southern California, but there's like South Coast Plaza Mall. If you go over the freeway, there's, Interplay and Virgin, and you've got John Wayne Airport right there. So we're all right there together. We're 5 minutes, from each other. But I remember he went talked to him and said, instead of having a title that we are just going to say, oh, it's the highest res thing ever, let's do a title that, we did 3D modeling. Joey did the 3D studio. Paul Burton was Deluxe Paint expert, doing that. Paul and a couple other guys there were just absolutely amazing pixel pushers. And I don't think they really have pixel pushers anymore because there's so many tools that do it for you. But back then, those guys with Deluxe Paint were just wizards. I just couldn't even believe it. And I had to learn Deluxe Paint because as a programmer, we didn't have the tools that they have now. You had to cut stuff up. So, one minor thing in, rock and roll racing is you look at all the power-ups. I drew those. Now, I didn't finish them, but I drew them in Deluxe Paint because Paul's like, I don't even know what you want, right? So I drew all the icons and everything. And then he went and actually turned them into real art. But Joey was doing the modeling, most of the modeling. I think we had a couple other people, who came in also during that time and helped with the modeling. And the modeling took forever. I mean, rendering from that stuff, not Joey didn't take forever, but actually rendering that stuff out just absolutely took forever. And so what they did was they rendered out, all the frames of all the shots of the car. And then, the pixel pushers would take them and touch them up and make them look really nice. And
that Amigas and the rendering as well.
No, they did it all on PCs. The only Amiga we had in the office was Frank's, right there at the front. So, and it's funny too, because if you look at some of the early pictures of, the Silicon Synapse, and I think it's still on Blizzard side, it was there like 5 years ago. You'll see me sitting there putting my desk together. Me and Adham went to the store and got, I think it was like Office Depot at the time or whatever it was. We went to the store and got a bunch of Sour desks, brought them in and we were all putting them together and the Amiga and Frank's desk was right there at the front. So, but yeah, so we'd render them out and then, we would use Sluggo. Heinemann and one of our friends, went in and designed, because the SNES development kits, the big square rectangle boxes, tan boxes, they were expensive. They were like 50,000, 100,000. They had some level of debugging. They weren't super reliable, but they were expensive. So, what Rebecca did is she covered with a friend and they created Sluggo. And Sluggo was exactly what it sounds like. It was fire and forget. There was no debugging whatsoever, but it had like I think it was a parallel interface that, went into the Super Nintendo and you could upload, everything to the SNES. But it took like 10 minutes. So
that really rings a bell from when we interviewed her. I think we must have interviewed her about 9 years ago. But Yeah, it was like a homemade version of a dev kit, basically.
It was. And it was, but the thing is, it's funny because it's like that, expert meme or whatever, where, you use Sluggo here and then everybody uses SNES dev kit and then you realize you use Sluggo over here, right? Sluggo, I mean, they were only like 5,000 or something like that. You buy like 50 of them, right? I mean, you could get a lot of dev done. Whereas the SNES dev kits from Nintendo were incredibly expensive. So, not so much. But yes, you had to be really good. Fortunately, because I had done, when I was learning the program and I was cracking everything, I had done, I don't know if you guys remember, there was a demo scene back then. Yeah. And I did lots and lots of demos. I did lots of stuff, learning how to do, polygonal math in assembly language, all that kind of stuff. And it was, so I was pretty good at putting up debug information onto the screen as we went. And so, we used Sluggo to do all of rock and roll racing, and it didn't even become rock and roll racing until the very end. I had finished a lot of the cut screens, and they had decided to, they'd had some meeting. I wasn't part of the meeting, but, where they decided to, put the soundtracks in and everything. And the things were kind of ending up, and I quit. So I went to program Wing Commander for Mindscape Software Toolworks, and you've probably heard some of this in the past, and I think a little differently now than I did back then. But Adham was a little bit hard to work for at the time, and older me understands he was under a lot of pressure, right? I mean, he was trying to get releases out. He was young too, right? And so anyway, the older me would not have quit like that, but younger me quit like that. And I went to do Wing Commander. But before I quit, the Lost Vikings and pinball game is that whole thing happened.
How did Lost Vikings come around, and how was it conceived?
So there are lead ups to this story that must be told. So, and I'll try to do them quickly. So, the Mount Gorgonio, you probably heard people talk about this story before, but, all of us, we were a pretty tight knit group, and we would go do stuff together all the time. And so we went to hike Mount Gorgonio one weekend. And so me, Adham, Pat, Alex, and a bunch of others, right? All of us basically. And when we came down, and it was a fun hike. We spent the night there. When we came down, we're going back home, and Adham's parents' van, and a dispute arose over the height of Mount Gorgonio. So it's funny because I told this story on Reddit once, and somebody who knows Adham asked him the story, and they came back and said, "Oh yeah, he laughed about that." So we came back, and there was a dispute on how tall Mount Gorgonio was. And so we all went to the office, and everybody wrote down, what the height they thought it was. And I didn't, because he'd already taken my lunch money. I wasn't going to do that again. Right. I was like, what, you guys, I'm not doing it. So anyway, I stayed there because I had work to do, and they all piled back into the car to go to, his, condo in Newport Beach. And sure enough, Adham was wrong. So everybody won, and he lost. And you could not talk about that at all for days. But it's relevant because that's when the kind of Lost Vikings planning sessions came in. And you have to realize that one of the things that I think made Blizzard so successful is that both Adham and Warheim from the very start were like, the game has to be fun. This has to be something that we enjoy doing. If it's not, then they would never make a movie game. The game had to be fun, and that was the most important part. And to this day, I think back, that was some of the best advice I ever got, in video game programming, is it has to be fun. It doesn't matter what else. It has to be worth playing. But anyway, that's relevant because we were playing Lemmings and Devil's Crush Pinball in the office heavily. Like, we were all playing these games. As soon as work was over for the day, we'd all gather in the conference room and we'd play video games. And that's just what we did. And we had a TurboGrafx 16 and Devil's Crush Pinball, and we had obviously Lemmings. And so the two ideas that we came up with were either we do a pinball game, which, by the way, I was a big advocate of the pinball game. I love to this day, I love Devil's Crush Pinball, one of the greatest pinball games ever made, in my opinion. But they also spec'd out a Lemmings game. And a lot of people don't realize that what Lost Vikings ended up as isn't what it started at. It started as a Lemmings clone. And so Adam and Warheim went and pitched it to Interplay. And they might have even pitched it to Davidson or something. I can't remember exactly. This is 40 years ago. I'm old. So, by the way, I apologize if I get any of this wrong. Just everybody knows how to get a hold of me. Just be like, Alan, I'll fix it. But so anyway, they pitched those two games. And it was also right around the time when Rebecca did, this is a long time ago, Lost World, I think. And basically, it was an absolute technical marvel. She figured out how to get bitmap graphics onto the Super Nintendo, which was mind-blowing, right? Because Lemmings, for the mechanic to work, you had to pick pixels out, basically. You couldn't pull big pieces out and have it go. So anyway, and the way she did it was, basically, she kept the scanlines blank at the top and was still DMAing information into BG RAM. It's like, I remember the code for doing that right now. It's like, I did 65.816 assembly language from when I was 12 to when I was 28, 27, something like that. So, I did a lot of assembly language back in the day, and it's fun thinking back because it was fun programming. It was a lot more fun programming those languages back in the day, but anyway, I digress. So anyway, we got back, and Morheim was actually going to program it. Not a lot of people know that, but he initially took on the task, and Heinemann came over and spent like a week trying to, kind of show him how to do it and everything. And he wasn't really getting anywhere. And honestly, I don't know Morheim's programming ability. I don't know if he's really good and it was just really hard or what. And by the way, Morheim was a great guy. He was always nice to me. And I am, there's nobody happier than me for the success that he's had in his career. And, super, super good guy. But anyway, so he banged his head against it for about a week. And, I helped, other people helped. We got in there, but eventually we realized that it was just not going to work. So, they went back to, brainstorming. Okay, what could this be? And right when they went to the brainstorming of what could it be, we started figuring it out. And that's when I left to go do Wing Commander, for Software Toolworks. But that is how Lost Vikings started. It was never supposed to be Lost. Well, the name probably, but it was never supposed to be what it ended up being. But it ended up being something really cool. So
I've got one question when you're still at Interplay. I know they were quite big supporters of the 3DO console. I remember like an Interplay like demo disc that was doing the rounds at the time, the Interplay 3DO buffet or something it was called. Yeah, have you got any memories of the 3DO, and were they quite enthusiastic about it?
When 3DO came out, this is the only story I got on 3DO, but it's a banger. So 3DO had a lot of launch parties when they came out, and it was in the Bay Area. And I remember being at one of them, and an outdoor launch party, and somebody ordered a giant ice sculpture. And this is in August. It was hot. And I just remember being out there, and we're all mingling, and everybody's there, all the programmers and producers and everything. And this sad ice sculpture was sitting there melting in the sun. It was almost like a metaphor for what happened with 3DO.
It's probably very expensive as well, yeah.
But no, I never programmed 3DO. Not because I didn't want to. I was programming other things at the time. But yeah, that was all I did with 3DO, and because I had left Interplay, I was still really good friends with Rebecca. But I had gone to Software Toolworks, and I did Wing Commander, I did the Game Genie, I worked on several other parts. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that, because I had somebody tell me one time, they said, "Why aren't you more famous?" I'm like, well, you don't realize that there are tons of us out there who did. It was rarely ever just one guy doing it or one girl doing it, right? It was always a team. And, I would do one part, I'd be a specialist in this or that. And, that's how it would be, right? And then they're like, "Why aren't you a billionaire from the Game Genie? Like, you really think I got royalties for that?" I was just a programmer.
well, before we get into Game Genie, let's talk about Wing Commander as well, because that is such a huge title. And
Wing Commander was so much fun. a couple.
Everything came together with it. I think the music, the graphics, the gameplay, it was that full kind of.
There were some brilliant things, and it was me, Dave, Henrik Markarian, and Andy, I think. And it was funny because it launched under the Mindscape title, but it was really Software Tour. So I didn't even know Mindscape still existed at the time when they launched it under that. But I got in there, and basically Wing Commander Software Toolworks was struggling financially a bit, right? And they had to get Wing Commander out. I mean, they absolutely had to, and they're a publisher. And so they brought in 4 people, highly thought of at the time and everything. And kind of a mercenary team, and we cranked it out in, I don't know, 6 months or something like that. And some of the cool things that happened there, besides me being on the side of the road of, I think, the 10 freeway, on the phone, plugging dimes in with Hyman explaining sliding window compression to me, because remember, I had no formal training. I taught myself all this, right? Well, taught myself is the wrong word. I do really well when I have tech reference manuals. I try to do something and I can look it up. I do poorly when it's instruction, and I wish it weren't that way, but it be that way. So anyway, sitting on the side of the road at a payphone and having Heinemann explain lighting window compression was one of the funner parts. But I had to do it because the cut screens were too big, and so we had to compress them, and that's what she recommended that I do. So I did that one, and but some of the really cool things. Obviously, we met all the Origin people. For that, they helped us out a little bit, but basically we got their C code from the PC version of Wing Commander, and we had to do a logic convert for it. And probably one of the craziest times I ever had in that particular build was we were decoding and it was Dave Sullivan who did this, and I'm still friends with him on LinkedIn, and he's in San Diego, still in video games. But he went through it, and I remember there was one point in his queue we hear this son of a, and we all go there and it's like, what's up? And he's like, he was doing the logic convert on the artificial intelligence, right? And it was some fairly gnarly code. And after he'd spent a couple weeks on it, he finally realized what it was. Wing Commander didn't have any artificial intelligence. Looked like it did, but it didn't. All it was trying to do was get behind you. And if it got behind you, it would stop and just shoot nonstop. So all of the crazy maneuvers that you saw were the crazy maneuvers you were making, not that it was making, because all the artificial intelligence was trying to do was just get behind you. And so if you turned on invincibility, it would circle around behind you, stop, and just fire until it couldn't fire anymore. When you realize that, he just spent 2 weeks converting very obtuse C code into a 65 assembly. And it was just trying to get behind you. That's it. That's all it was trying to do. And so that was pretty cool. Also I remember the meteor field and it's been so long.
The Starfield.
Yeah, the Starfield and the meteor field was actually the same code. And I remember when I think it was Dave, it might have been Andy who came up with that. And he's like, I could just reuse this. And we all went over there and looked, and you couldn't tell they were the same, because, the sprites were different. Everything was different on it. And it was absolutely brilliant, because when we had started doing Wing Commander, the biggest worry that we all had was that we were going to have enough power to be able to pull this fairly complex game off and do that. And just little things like that really came together to make the game. And, and Henrik was a fantastic producer. He did a really good job, and it was in Nevada, California. And, I remember the time. Oh, and, so because we're a mercenary team, once it was done, they threw a big parties for us and everything. And then they fired us all the next Monday. So, we had that.
Wow.
Yeah. Again, I'm just a poor country boy from Arkansas. I grew up fast, but I'll just say that, my innocence was I saw humanity pretty quick, but anyway, so they fired us, and fired us is the wrong word. It wasn't mean spirited. It's just, they were hurting for money, and they did, they were compensating as well, and they just had to do what they had to do. It would have been nice if they told us beforehand that was their plans, but didn't work out that way. But anyway, so as that happened, have you ever heard of Toys for Bob?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So the guys at Toys for Bob, the main guy's still a friend of mine to this day. Actually, almost everybody's still friends of mine to this day. And good people, you know, a lot of very successful people came out of that time that, you know, are now, you know, CTOs, CIOs, you know, started their own companies, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, I digress. Main guy for Toys for Bob heard about it, and they had been doing the Genesis version of the Game Genie. And you're gonna love this story. They also knew, so they were working for this company called Microsystems Development, and it was down in San Jose. Microsystems Development was doing it for Glue Toys. I think that was the layer above them. And so they had contracted out the Super Nintendo version to this guy who was working on it, and also working for Waldo, working on SNES Worlds for Waldo. And again, this is relevant to the story. And you can't make this up. He disappeared one day. When I say disappeared, I don't mean he gave his notice and, you know, trundled off in the sunset. I mean, he just disappeared. He
vanished.
Stopped showing up for work, and he vanished. Yeah. And so the Toys for Bob guys, who knew that I just lost my job at Software Toolworks, they hit me up and they said, these guys need a SNES guy right now, like literally right now. So I went down to San Jose like the next day, and I met with them, and they said, you know, it's maybe a quarter done, you know, it's barely here, but we need it done in 30 days. And I said, you know, this project's like 3, 4, 5 months. And they said, I'll pay you $1,000 a day to do it. I'm like, 30 days it is. So, and by the way, at the time, I didn't know that much money existed because, again, I'm a poor kid from Arkansas, right? So anyway, they gave me, I was living in Mill Valley, but it's a place called Strawberry Point that jets out from Mill Valley and looks out over, you know, the bay, out over Alcatraz and that whole area. And I was staying I had an apartment, third floor of this apartment complex that had these garbage chutes. I don't really see them anymore. But they had where you put your garbage in the chute, you know, from the third floor, and it just went down. So at Microsystems Development, they had told me that, their hardware wasn't super stable yet. I was like, all right. And then they handed me a stack of 10 Super Nintendos and said, hope for the best. So I took them back, and I blew the first 2 or 3 pretty quickly. And then I started being really careful. You know, I got a static discharge pad and just like really, really, really was careful. Through the process of doing it, it took me about 30 days, almost exactly on the note, including Rebecca helping me, learn what debounce was and, you know, those kinds of things. But about, I would say 5 days in, I had blown through all 10 Super Nintendos, right? I was down to my last one. I get a call, and they, sent a courier to all of the local software, et cetera. And, you know, yeah, Egghead, if you remember those, and they bought them all, and they brought them to me. So I had 20 Super Nintendos that they delivered to my doorstep in Strawberry Point. And so I used those to finish, you know, the Game Genie. And when I was done, I had 6 left or something, and I gave them away as presents. I still have one of them that, you know, was the one that they gave me, but I finished it. I finished the actual everything of it because, and I bet it's funny because I've been asked this story many times, like, well, how are they making the codes? What did you do to make the codes? I didn't do anything. I mean, the codes were made by, and, you know, when you're young, you don't know that you should take a picture of it, right? But there was this big office area in, Microsystems Development where they had these old guys with oscilloscopes, and what they were doing was they were playing the game, and then they were checking leads. Or I'm not a hardware guy, so I don't know, but I asked them, what is that? That's an oscilloscope. Okay, sounds good to me. But they were looking for, you know, the memory locations. It's not like today where you can just dump RAM and compare it to the other, you know, dump and you know where you get. They actually had to do it. And so what I did was, the codes were essentially a memory location and what you wanted to shove into that memory location, for all intents and purposes, right? So they were the ones actually making code. And it's funny watching, these old guys with those oscilloscopes play these games. and, be writing stuff down. They're very diligent and everything. And they kicked a bunch of butt because they figured it all out. But I finished it at 4 a.m. on a Sunday morning. And, I remember, submitting, the final to them. We'd burn the ROM and they'd go check it and everything. And I had been there the whole weekend and every week an hour. And they had, I don't know if you guys remember, Jolt Cola was a thing back in the day. And they had a steady supply of Jolt Cola that they were feeding me.
Lots of caffeine. Yeah. That's what I was going to say.
So like at 4 a.m. on Sunday morning, I submitted and they said, yep, this is done. And I still had like, I don't know, a 6-pack of Jolt Cola in their little mini fridge right there. And, I shook their hand. I actually fully expected there to be bugs to come up, but, apparently did. I mean, it wasn't a super complicated thing to do, right? I mean, the hardware was probably the hardest part. And I didn't work on the hardware. I just did the programming.
I was interested as well because I know Nintendo sued them with the original Game Genie, and then didn't they block it from working on later Super Nintendo revisions? I guess Nintendo weren't very happy about the add-on.
They could have, but it's funny. And people think that video game programmers know their games 20 ways to Sunday, and we don't, because it's the producers, it's the testers who had to play it a million times. We program it, and sometimes we don't even know why we're doing it. I mean, I've always cared about my games being fun because I'm a gamer to this day. I still game a lot, probably a lot more than my wife wants me to. But after I was done with it, I was done with it because I got version 1, and I've still got, I think it's serial number like 12 of the Game Genie, and I've got a little note that when they sent it to me, they put a note. Alan, thanks for all your hard work. And, we still have your Jolt Cola in the fridge if you ever want to swing by and say hi. And I think I posted a screenshot or the picture of that once to Reddit. If you ever want to go out there and look at it. I think I've got, might be the last burn of the Game Genie. I still have the ROM, from that, from the last burn. And, that was a fun project, but I left there to move to Salt Lake because back in the day for Super Nintendo and video game programs in general, you moved around a lot. I mean, basically you went and did a project, here, you did a project there. And at the time, I was still, I think it was like 21 by then, right? 20, 21, 22, something like that. But, George Metos and Sculptured Software, who absolutely phenomenal software, house, they, dev shop. They brought me on to do Kaboom on the Super Nintendo. And so, I moved to Salt Lake, and because they, for subsequent stuff, they asked if I could come back, and it was just too much to work my day job, go back to San Francisco and help them. And so I think, other programmers might have done version 2, version 3, version 4, that kind of thing. But I did the original. I still have the source code to the original even. So, one of the things Rebecca gets on to me a lot about is I have a garage full of retro gaming history of more things than you could possibly imagine.
Rebecca's big into preservation, isn't she? Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because you'd actually posted on a Reddit about a cancelled title, and that got quite a few headlines as well, which was propaganda. Could you tell us more about that?
Oh, sure. So, after Sculptured, I helped with a couple other games, and I did a lot of work at Sculptured. I worked on, Mortal Kombat, Empire Strikes Back. Kaboom was canceled, but not because it wasn't finished. It was canceled because Activision and Sculpture got into a spat over something. And so, the finished original Kaboom exists somewhere. And, I might have the source code to it floating around my stuff somewhere, but I know that, it was finished and then it never got in there. But anyway, so I went to, Virgin Games and, which was a fabulous, fabulous place to work. You British people are pretty amazing people, and it was all British people. And, I say that tongue in cheek because they basically, they are more tight knit than any other studio I'd worked for. And I mean, they just did everything together. We went to lunch together, and we went to the pub after. It was a really good time for me. And it's funny too, because, it was Chris Harvey, Tea Time Designs, which I had the entire design document for Propaganda 6 or 7 years ago, and it was this thick, right, printed out. I threw it away because I thought, why would I ever need this? And now I deeply regret that decision. I wish I could go back and get that back, but here we are, right? But anyway, so Propaganda, I was brought on to be the Saturn programmer. And I remember it was dual stage pipeline risk assembly, but it was mostly C. But if you had to optimize anything, then you had to get into risk assembly. And I'd never done pipeline risk assembly, but it actually was a lot of fun. But I will say there was a tremendous number of no-ops that you write into assembly that is both dual stage pipeline and risk-based, because some things can execute before others. And, I won't get into the details. But anyway, so Propaganda was a kind of a what would be a kind of a scenario game now, I guess. And it was kind of old world Mad Max, but in the city kind of chic stuff. And Chris had the PlayStation version of it, and I was doing the Saturn version of it, which again I've got the very last cut that I did before I left there. It's on that. I think I posted a picture of it, but we had burned it to, I think, a bug CD or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but the first 3 or 4 months, Virgin did not have a very good tool chain, and so the first 3 or 4 months, basically, we were getting dumps of model files that we didn't really know how to do, and we were doing a lot of stuff by hand. So gosh, what was the name of the guy, the VP guy who had a BMW M3, and we all thought he was so cool. He was cool, but he said, well, why don't you just write some tools for this? I went, all right, we'll do it. So I know they were doing Spot at the time and a couple other games. So I got with some of the other developers, and we wrote I think it was Microsoft Foundation classes, but again, it was a long time ago. I know there was a lot of Borland stuff floating around that was like T window, T this, T that. I'm old. And, but it was all C. And so, we wrote some utilities that basically, took the models, turned them into, point pool, poly pool, all those kind of things. I designed the tool, and Chris wrote the PlayStation implementation of it. The Saturn implementation of it was really hard though, because the Saturn had quads, not polys. And because of the tool chain, everything else used polys. We had to extrude the textures for the Saturn. So basically if you look at what we did, it was still polys, but it was extruded texture polys on the Saturn, which I'm sure wasn't amazing for the performance, but it's simply what we had at the time. So anyway, so I got the tool chain going, and then we started getting into, actually writing the game. This is something that happens to this day in not just video gaming, but so anyway, our producer, Kelly, who, it's my understanding he's since passed, but he was super, super nice guy. Just like one of the most enthusiastic producers I've ever worked with. And I liked him a lot. But anyway, he, if you ever hear that your producer's gone on an offsite with marketing, just run in the other direction and just keep running. So, we had 18 months to do this game, Propaganda, to, finish it off and, make it amazing. And we were about 3-4 months in, and we had just basically done tool chain stuff to get the basics going. I know Paul or Chris, before I'd gotten there, he'd gotten some stuff into the PlayStation, but I'm lazy. I mean, I'm really lazy, and I don't like copying stuff by hand. So if I get into something like that, I turn it into a tool. To this day, I do that. I don't have any patience for that. But anyway, so we did that, and then we got about 2 months into, basically getting the cityscapes out. I know, Tea Time Designs guys, gosh, I wish I could remember their names. One guy was very Scottish, just the most Scottish person you ever, and I'd never met a Scottish person before. And it was, he was Bob. He was super fun to be around. And, he made a lot of jokes, but anyway, we got that in, and I would say it was probably August of 94, maybe 95. And Kelly went on an offsite with the marketing team. And the marketing team at Virgin was a very large marketing team, right? I mean, they really cared about their advertising and everything. They were good at it too. But they took him out And they were off site for about a week. And when he came back, he called us all into his office. And, the Virgin Studios were this very industrial looking kind of studio. We all in common areas. But Kelly had his own office that was kind of off of our main area. And he called us all in. And he was so excited. And he's like, guys, you're not going to believe this. He's like, we knew this game was going to be great before, but now this is going to be one of the greatest games ever. And all of us are like, I don't know, man. What are you about to tell us? And then he laid it on us. He's like, I know that I said this game was going to take 18 months to do. And I know we're only like, 4 or 5 months in. But what we figured out is that we cut the schedule down so that we're going to finish the game in 2 months. And then we're going to have a whole 11, 12 months to finish, tuning it, testing it. And it's going to be the most amazing thing ever.
Wow.
And then all of us are sitting there like shell shocked, like, oh, that doesn't sound like a good idea. And so I remember there's a printer in our main area. And I think pretty much everybody printed out their resume that day. And I left a month or so after that because the next day we came back and I'm like, are you crazy? I just can't do that. I mean, there's a reason why the schedule is what it is, right? I mean, it's not like we're taking that long because, we want it to take that long. That's how long it takes. And he wouldn't budge because he promised the marketing team. So I left. I think Chris left. A few others left. The core of the team left, right? And then I think it soldiered on for another 2-3 years and then was finally canceled. But yeah, that killed that would have been a good game. And we had a solid team there. We had, good people at all the positions. And I was kind of pioneering the Saturn work for Virgin. So that was going to be good. And yeah, it just went down from there. So
if you ever find any of these prototypes, I know Frank and the team at the Games at Once, which is a great website. I know we'd love to get that preserved. So if you ever have a look through that garage,
right,
that'd be awesome to see.
And like I said, Rebecca gets on to me all the time because I've got so many artifacts like that that I just need to send them to somebody. But the thing is, I do. I got into programming because I love programming. I love. I'm doing a lot of neural network work right now. I love math. I love that kind of thing. I do tons of private equity consulting. I don't have a moment to myself. I mean, I'm always doing stuff. I'm always in meetings. And it's just hard, and my wife says the problem isn't that I work all the time. It's that I like it.
One thing that you kind of helped get involved with, just before we end the interview, because we've packed so much in, was Winamp.
I just briefly, Winamp started with me, Dimitri, and Justin. I had started an EFNet channel called Utah because I lived in Utah and I just wanted to meet more people here in Utah. And so I started it. And that's where I met Dimitri and Justin. And most people don't realize Justin didn't originally create Winamp. Dimitri did. So Dimitri had taken the MP3 code and Dimitri was the Mac guy. And I think he was at the University of Utah and he had brought it and he talked to Justin about it in our Utah channel stuff. And so we typically, we get together at D's in Salt Lake City and we talk about just stuff, right? And it was mostly not programmers, but the three of us were programmers. And so Justin was really interested. He's like, man, I need to make a player for the PC because Dimitri had made it for the Mac. And I was a PC programmer and video game programmer. So he asked me, he's like, well, Alan, how would you do it? I'm like, well, I know how to do Microsoft Foundation classes. I know how to skim stuff. So I wrote some of the original stuff to help him and showed him how to do it. But back then, I was just too busy. I didn't have time to help. But I regret that decision very much. So love you, Justin. But I'm still friends with Justin, though. But yeah, so that's how Winamp kind of got started. And I didn't even know that he had sold it to AOL at the time. And then somebody said, "Oh, you're in the credits." And I'm like, "Really?" And yeah, I looked at the very end. It's like, "Special thanks, Alan Anderson." I'm like, "Oh, thanks, Justin." Wow. Yeah, in his defense, it's not like I stuck with the project or anything. So I don't no hard feelings. But yeah, that's where Winamp started.
You need to check out a thing called Reamp. It's like Winamp redone on the Mac, and you can have all the old skins on there and stuff.
Justin's superpower, and it very much was one, is that Justin had this ability to get onto something and just not let it go. Like he would never get bored of it. He would track that thing down to the very end of the earth. And that's why, that's why it ended up being what it was. And I know we're out of time. One other thing that we get to at some point, because I wrote the Game Genie, the reason why you're able to do blood in Mortal Kombat Super Nintendo 1 is because I made sure that the palette entry for sweat, because Nintendo made us have to put sweat instead of blood in there. So we changed it to white. I made sure it had its own palette entry so that people could go into the Game Genie and turn it back to red. Because otherwise it was a shared color entry with a bunch of other things on the sprites. So you're welcome, America and the world.
The whole generation thanks you. Al, we have crammed so much into that hour, and thank you so much for being so generous with your time and sharing some of your history as well. It's you've done so much, so thanks so much for sharing some of your stories. It's been wonderful to talk to you.
Thanks for having me on. I mean, it's before I die, I'd like to get some of these stories out, and like I said, there's so many more that I haven't even told that I crammed a lot into, a short amount of time, and I had a lot of fun doing it. And it's fun to talk about it because those were some really fun times. So it's fun to relive those memories.
And get in that garage. I agree with Rebecca. We need to preserve this stuff.
I know. Well, Rebecca's like, you know what? I'm just going to fly out there and we're going to go sit through your garage. It might be what it takes.
Fantastic. Well, nice to talk to you. Thanks again for coming on.
Good talking to you guys. Thanks for having me on.